I should have known it was over the night I sat across from Kennedy in that dimly lit cabin, watching the reflection of candlelight flicker in his tired, indifferent eyes. We weren't fighting. We weren't screaming. And that was the problem. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fight for. Just two people existing in the same space, bound by old vows that had lost their meaning. That's when I knew. Not when I cheated. Not when I felt another man's lips against mine. But in that moment, long before I even met Aaron. That's when my marriage ended. But sometimes, you don't realize you're drowning until someone pulls you up for air. If you've ever felt lost in love, if you've ever questioned the life you built, then don't forget to like and subscribe. Because some stories, like mine, you won't want to miss. 8 years. That's how long Kennedy and I had been married. Enough time to know his routine better than my own heartbeat. The way he cleared his throat before speaking. The way he chewed his food slowly, methodically, as if measuring each bite. The way he touched me, when he even remembered to, like I was something fragile and obligatory, rather than someone he desired. We weren't always like this. There was a time when I couldn't wait for him to come home, when his touch sent shivers through my skin, when his laughter was my favorite sound in the world. But somewhere along the way, life happened. Work, stress, silence. And suddenly, we were strangers sharing a bed, both too afraid to admit it wasn't working. The retreat was supposed to fix that. His idea, not mine. We need this, Tasha, he had said one night, his voice careful, measured. I need this. I had agreed because saying no felt like admitting the truth. I wasn't sure I wanted to be saved. The drive up to the retreat was 3 hours long. 3 hours of awkward silence, filled with small talk that didn't matter. I watched trees blur past the window, wondering if the version of me who fell in love with Kennedy would recognize the woman I had become. The retreat was in the mountains, tucked away in nature as if isolation could fix what was broken. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the lodge was warm, rustic, filled with other couples who looked just as desperate as we did. Therapists greeted us with smiles too wide, voices too gentle, like we were fragile things they needed to handle with care. We were assigned a cabin. One bed. One final attempt at intimacy. The first evening was meant to be a bonding exercise. Tell your partner one thing you miss about them, the instructor said. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably beside me. His lips parted, then hesitated. The room was silent, everyone waiting. Finally, he said, I miss the way we used to talk. It was an answer that sounded right, but it wasn't. Because I knew the truth. He didn't miss the way we used to talk. He missed not feeling guilty for how much we had drifted apart. And then it was my turn. I opened my mouth, but the words refused to come. I glanced away, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting in the corner, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. His presence was magnetic, even in the dim light. He wasn't paying attention to the exercise, wasn't pretending like everyone else. He looked uninterested, unamused. And then, just as I was about to look away, his eyes met mine. A deep, knowing gaze. I should have turned back to Kennedy. I should have been focused on saving my marriage. But for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. His name was Aaron. I didn't know that yet. Not then. But his presence unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. That night, I lay in bed beside Kennedy, listening to the soft hum of the retreat outside our window. Owls hooted in the distance. Couples whispered in nearby cabins, trying to mend broken pieces of love. And me? I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside me. I had come here to fix my marriage. But something told me, this trip would break it beyond repair. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth through the open window of our cabin. I turned over, expecting to feel Kennedy's warmth beside me, but the sheets were cold. I found him outside, sitting on the porch steps, sipping his coffee like he always did, alone, lost in his own world. For a moment, I considered sitting beside him. Saying something. Asking if he felt as disconnected as I did. But I already knew the answer. By the time I stepped out, he was already standing, his expression unreadable. "The first session starts soon," he said. No smile, no touch, just a statement of fact. I nodded. "I'll get ready." We weren't a couple anymore. We were two people following a script, hoping it would magically change the ending. The retreat's first exercise was simple: reconnect through eye contact. We were paired with our spouses, instructed to stare into each other's eyes for a full minute without speaking. 60 seconds stretched into an eternity. I looked at Kennedy, searching for something: love, longing, even regret. Anything to show he still cared. But all I saw was a man forcing himself to engage, a man who had already accepted defeat. And maybe I had too. The session continued, but I felt detached, like I was watching everything from a distance. And then I saw him again. Aaron. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his jaw tight with frustration. His partner, who I assumed was his wife, was whispering something to him, her face tense. They weren't here to fix things. They were here to end them. As the instructor spoke about active listening, I glanced at Aaron again. And then, suddenly, he was looking right at me. I don't know what made me step away from the group later that afternoon. Maybe I needed air, maybe I needed space, or maybe I was looking for something without realizing it. I found myself near the retreat's walking trail, staring at the lake, lost in thought. Then, a voice behind me. Deep, smooth, with a touch of amusement. "Let me guess. You're thinking about running." I turned, and there he was, Aaron. A slight smirk played on his lips, but his eyes weren't mocking. They were curious. "Running?" I asked. He nodded toward the lake. "People come here to fix what's broken, but most of them are just looking for a way out." I swallowed, my pulse suddenly too loud. "And which one are you?" His smirk faded slightly. I think I stopped believing in fixing a long time ago. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. "Your wife?" I asked, before I could stop myself. He exhaled a small laugh. "Ex-wife. Technically. We signed the papers last month. She wanted this retreat for closure. I came because I owed her that much. I shouldn't have been talking to him. I shouldn't have cared. But something about the honesty in his voice made me want to keep listening. And then he asked the question I wasn't ready for. "What about you?" I hesitated. "What about me? Are you trying to fix things, or are you trying to leave?" I should have said I was trying to fix it. That's why I was here, wasn't it? But I couldn't find the words. Over the next 2 days, I found myself noticing Aaron more. Or maybe he was noticing me. We were placed in the same discussion groups, partnered for exercises, forced into spaces where our connection grew silently between us. It was never too much. Never obvious. But I felt it in every small glance, in the way his voice deepened when he spoke to me, in the way my body responded whenever he was close. Kennedy never noticed. Or maybe he just didn't care. The night it truly changed, I had stepped outside our cabin for air. The retreat had scheduled an intimacy-building session, but Kennedy had opted out, claiming a headache. I sat on the wooden railing, staring at the moonlit lake, my mind spinning. Then I heard his voice again. Couldn't sleep either? I turned to find Aaron standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets. I knew I should have gone back inside. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Do you regret coming here?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the way the moonlight touched his face. No. If I hadn't come, I wouldn't have met you. My breath hitched. And then, without thinking, I whispered something I shouldn't have. "I think you see me more than my own husband does." Aaron didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes dark with something unspoken. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. But I remember the moment our bodies were too close, the heat between us undeniable. I could feel his breath against my skin, his presence thick in the air between us. The retreat was silent, the night wrapped in a cocoon of secrecy. We shouldn't have been standing there like that. Not with my husband asleep in our cabin just a few feet away. I should have pulled back. Walked away. But I didn't. I let the moment linger. Let the possibility settle between us like something inevitable. "Tasha," Aaron's voice was low, rough. A warning. An invitation. And then, before I could stop myself, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I leaned in. His lips met mine, slow at first, as if giving me a chance to change my mind. But the second I didn't pull away, he deepened the kiss, his hands sliding around my waist, pulling me closer. I melted into him. Into the warmth of someone who wanted me. Not out of obligation. Not because it was expected. But because he needed me just as much as I needed him. And in that moment, I didn't care about anything else. The kiss didn't last long, but it was enough to set everything in motion. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. I should have felt guilty. I should have thought about Kennedy, about our vows, about the reason we were here in the first place. But all I could think about was how alive I felt for the first time in years. Aaron ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched. "We shouldn't have done that." I swallowed, my heart still pounding. "I know." But neither of us moved. Neither of us left. Because deep down, we both knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The next day, I tried to pretend like nothing had happened. Kennedy noticed nothing. Or maybe he didn't care enough to ask why I was acting different. The retreat schedule was packed with exercises designed to reignite intimacy, trust-building activities, couples counseling, guided discussions. It should have been working. But every time I sat next to Kennedy, I felt nothing. And every time I caught Aaron's gaze across the room, I felt everything. The stolen glances. The tension that built with every passing second. The way my skin tingled every time he walked past me, close enough for our arms to brush. We were playing with fire. And I was already burning. That evening, the retreat hosted a bonfire session, one last group activity before we left the next day. Couples sat around the fire, sharing their experiences, their struggles, their hopes. Kennedy and I sat together, but we weren't really together. He barely touched me. barely looked at me. And when it was his turn to speak, he said the words that sealed our fate. I think we still have a long way to go, but we'll keep trying. Keep trying. Not I love my wife. Not I'll fight for this. Just trying. Like our marriage was a burden. A task to complete. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I wasn't sure what I expected. A declaration of love? A sign that he still cared? But I got nothing. And the only person who noticed my disappointment was Aaron. I don't remember how I ended up in his cabin that night. I just remember knocking, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. And when he opened the door, shirtless, his eyes dark with something unreadable, I knew there was no turning back. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need words. The second the door closed behind me, his hands were on my waist, his lips at my ear, his breath hot against my skin. I gasped, my body trembling as he pulled me closer. You don't have to do this, he murmured, but his grip on me tightened. I want to, I whispered back. And then, we stopped pretending. There was no guilt, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Just need. Hunger. Desperation. We collided like two people who had been starving for too long. His hands explored every inch of me, his mouth claiming mine, igniting a fire that had been waiting to consume me. It wasn't just about sex. It was about feeling something real. Something I had lost a long time ago. And in that moment, I didn't care about the consequences. I just wanted to feel alive again. I woke up before the sun. The first thing I noticed was the weight of Aaron's arm draped over me, the slow rise and fall of his chest against my back. For a fleeting second, I let myself exist in that moment, wrapped in warmth, tangled in sheets that didn't belong to my husband. Then reality crashed down. I sat up carefully, sliding out from beneath Aaron's touch. I stood at the edge of the bed, my heart pounding, my mind racing. What had I done? The retreat was ending today. In a few hours, I'd have to get into a car with Kennedy and pretend I wasn't a woman who had just blown up her marriage in the arms of another man. Aaron stirred behind me. You don't have to run, he murmured, his voice still laced with sleep. I turned to him, my chest tight. This was a mistake. He sat up, his gaze steady, unreadable. Was it? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that guilt was swallowing me whole, that I wished I could erase last night. But I couldn't. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was the first time in years I had felt something real. And that terrified me more than the cheating itself. I walked back to my cabin in the early morning light, my hands shaking. Kennedy was awake when I stepped inside. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at the floor. The air between us was heavy. Too heavy. I braced myself for the worst. Maybe he knew. Maybe he had seen me sneaking back. Maybe. Are you ready to go? He asked, his voice hollow. I blinked. That's it? He finally looked at me. What else is there to say, Tasha? His eyes weren't accusing. They weren't even angry. Just tired. And that was when I realized something. Kennedy hadn't lost me last night. He had lost me a long time ago. Maybe he had known it too. Maybe that's why he didn't ask where I had been. Because he didn't want to know. Because deep down, he already knew the answer. The drive back was silent. Kennedy didn't touch me. Didn't try to talk. And I didn't offer anything either. I kept waiting for the guilt to consume me, for the weight of my betrayal to suffocate me. But instead, all I felt was sadness. Sadness for what we had been. Sadness for the version of us that had once existed. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I knew we were over. But we didn't say it. Not yet. Kennedy turned off the car, exhaling deeply. Tasha. I turned to him, waiting. He didn't look at me when he said the words that broke me more than any argument ever could. I think we should stop pretending. A lump formed in my throat. Pretending what? That we can fix this. It was strange. I had wanted to hear those words for so long. I had prayed for the moment we could finally acknowledge the truth. So why did it still hurt? I swallowed hard, nodding. Okay. He sighed, nodding too, like a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Then, without another word, he got out of the car and walked inside. And just like that, our marriage was over. I didn't see Aaron again. We hadn't exchanged numbers. We hadn't made promises. Maybe that's what made it real. Maybe that's why it meant something. Because Aaron wasn't my escape plan. He wasn't my new beginning. He was just the man who woke me up. The man who made me realize that love isn't about how long you stay. It's about how alive you feel while you're there.